Hi, welcome to Mother Murderer Podcaster, where we celebrate the best and the most outrageous made for TV movies of the 80s and 90s. I'm Lewis Jordan, a writer,
Hi, I'm Katie Madonna Lee, a filmmaker.
and today we're covering the 1989 made for TV movie A Cry for Help, the Tracey Thurman Story, starring Nancy McKeon, who's Joe from The Facts of Life, and Dale Midkiff. And it first aired on October 2nd, 1989 on NBC. This time we have a guest on the podcast, our first guest, Autumn Welker. Say hello to everybody.
Hello, everyone.
uh, Welcome. And
Thank you.
Autumn is a friend of Katie's and actually suggested that we cover this movie. And
Yes,
so I
sir.
think we'll have some interesting insights on this. So, Cry for Help. It was written by Beth Sullivan, who went on to create the show Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. And it was directed by Robert Markowitz, a prolific TV movie director. It was nominated for Best Cinematography in a movie of the week for the American Society of Cinematographers, and was nominated for an Emmy for Best Makeup for a miniseries or special. I'm going to do a plot summary, and then we can get into discussing this movie, which is, we do movies that are lighter and campier, like our Dolly Parton one the last time, and then we do other ones that are much more serious, and this is definitely a serious one. Not only is it a ripped from the headlines TV movie, but it's a really well made one and kind of unusually dark. The plot summary: so the movie opens on the story's climax, which shows Tracey Thurman being brutally stabbed by her husband, Buck, while the police fail to protect her. And then it flashes back to show us how she got there. So Tracey is working as a maid in a hotel when she's spotted by Buck, and they flirt, they play poker with his work buddies, and later that night they have sex. Tracey reveals that she was taking care of her mother who was ill, and her mother just died. And so now she's sort of trying to find a life for herself. So the two start a relationship, but pretty soon Buck begins to be abusive. First, he hits a door and then apologizes and begs her not to leave him. And he tells Tracey how awful his childhood was, and she feels sorry for him. And then 3 months later, they're living together, and Tracey finds out she's pregnant. When she tells him, Buck explodes and he hits her. So Tracey leaves, and she goes to her hometown in Connecticut to stay with her friend Judy. And Tracey tries looking for help, but her sister is not supportive. She's competitive and mean to her. And so Buck tracks Tracey down at Judy's, and he's very apologetic. Tracey knows it'll be hard to raise the baby herself. And she wants to believe that Buck will change. So she gives him another chance, and they get married. But pretty soon, he starts losing his temper again. He convinces her to leave her hometown and go back on the road with him and his construction job. And then a year later, once she's had their baby, Buck is back to drinking and gambling, and he assaults Tracey. So she takes the baby and she leaves him, goes back to Judy's in Connecticut. Again, Buck goes after Tracey, but she refuses to go back to him. So he grabs their child and tries to kidnap him. Tracey calls the police, but the police don't take the case seriously. They sympathize with Buck and saying, oh, well, Tracey won't let him see his kid. And they encourage Tracey to get back together with Buck. So Tracey secretly starts to file for divorce, but Buck stays in town to keep an eye on her. He starts working at a diner and making friends with cops while on the job. And when Buck finds out that Tracey has started to file for divorce, he attacks her and punches out her car window. So Tracey files a complaint. Buck is sentenced to 6 months in jail, with the sentence suspended if he leaves Connecticut and stays away from her. But pretty soon, he's right back to stalking her. So again, Tracey calls the police. The police say, oh, we can't find a court order. We can't do anything unless you have a restraining order. So then she gets a restraining order, And then the police say, oh, we never received it. And then they get another restraining order, but they don't pay attention to that. And it just continues like this, where she keeps asking for help and the police just keep ignoring her. And finally, the movie arrives at the opening scene where Buck shows up yelling. Tracey calls the cops. An old cop gets the call and he takes his time responding. Then Tracey comes out into the yard to try to stop Buck from yelling and, possibly breaking in. And the cop car pulls up. And then Buck pulls a knife, chases Tracey, tackles her, and stabs her 13 times. The cop is there and he confronts Buck, but he's completely useless. He doesn't put Buck under arrest or do anything. He takes the knife away from him, but that's it. Then Buck runs to the house. He grabs CJ, runs back to Tracey, and stomps on her neck while the cop watches, doing nothing. It's a really shocking and upsetting scene. And then more cops arrive, but they just kind of mill around while Buck is screaming and carrying the kid and running around. Nobody even tries to stop Buck until he literally tries to pull Tracey out of the ambulance. So later, Tracey's in the hospital. She's partially paralyzed, scarred from her injuries. She's going through painful physical therapy. Buck is charged with first-degree assault, not attempted murder, sentenced to 14 years in prison, but with the possibility of parole. He could only get out in a few years, which he does. He gets out in 8. So Tracey decides to sue the city and the police force. And during the trial, we go over the many failings of the police force and just how spectacular from the police department. And at the end, scrolling text tells us that Tracey Thurman's case set a federal precedent and a new law in Connecticut called the Thurman Law, which requires police to treat domestic violence like they would any other crime. I guess the first thing is Autumn. Why don't you tell us about the first time that you saw this movie?
Sure. Well, I remember it vividly because it was 1989, and in March of 1989, here in Mishawaka, actually, a woman by the name of Lisa Bianco was killed by her husband, Alan Matheny, in the yard very violently. She was actually beat to death, and
Jesus.
he went on death row. But the whole situation from Lisa Bianco also changed a law, but it had just occurred that March. And the movie that we're talking about came out in the fall, you said. So it was like a double whammy for women, especially in this area, because of losing Lisa Bianco so violently. And then the Tracey Thurman story came out. And it just reminded women, because it was a very common thing in the 80s, domestic violence was very, very common in this area. I know more women that were abused than not.
It still is.
It still is.
It still is.
Yeah.
But the point I think that I was saying was because it used to be just something that happened and people just never brought it up as an issue. There were no laws to help women. In the 90s, the Violence Against Women Act came into fruition.
Yes.
And some laws were changed because of both the Tracey Thurman situation, but also Lisa Bianco. So, laws have changed since the 90s, but that year, 89, was a realization of domestic violence being such an issue that society really needed to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this movie was a catalyst in some way. You saw it as something that was kind of like reflecting a reality that's going on around you that people weren't acknowledging.
Definitely. Well, my mother was a victim of domestic violence for a long time, and she got out of domestic violence because her abuser died. And so I think my mother, especially when Lisa Bianco was killed, she had the purple ribbons. I'm wearing purple in honor of Lisa Bianco because it was her favorite color. And the domestic violence ribbons are purple because of Lisa Bianco. So,
I didn't know that.
Yes. So, and, I think because it was a hometown girl and all these things were coming out to light, I think it triggered my mom because her life had totally changed since her abuser had died. But she went through a lot of the stuff that Tracey Thurman went through, getting her head stomped, being in the hospital for stuff. And, we've seen it. It was very common, like I said, growing up, abuse of men, it was out in the open, so it was something that I think we were thankful that, it was being brought to light and things seemed to be changing, but it was very triggering.
Yeah, I can imagine. My God. Katie, how about you? What was the first time that you saw this movie?
The first time I saw this movie was in 1989, and I remember vividly the opening scene where he stabs her out in the open in public.
Yeah.
I remember that. And that image stayed with me for it stayed in my mind. And then when I made The Execution of Julian Mabry, I made that based on Lisa Bianco. And when people are asking if it's a true story, it's a composite story. I pieced together 2 lives of women in Indiana. And the first part is Lisa Bianco. The mom is based on Lisa Bianco. The mom.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I was thinking, how did her death affect the children? And what would that do to her daughter? And that's how I made that movie, and that's how I made that arrived at that decision, because it was a big deal. It was shocking. It was shocking because her husband who killed her was in prison. He was in prison and he had furlough. Lisa Bianco. He was in the Miami Correctional Facility, which is in
Pendleton.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
So Lisa Bianco's story goes like this. Alan Matheny assaulted Lisa Bianco when she divorced him. She was in the process of divorcing him, and he got, I think, 8 years for that. She had to put him away because he tried to actually kill her, and she was trying to get away from him. So when he went to prison, she told them, his mother actually had called Lisa to tell her the first time he was going to get a furlough. And she had written to the prison. I think it's whack that she also wrote to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor was like, oh, well, you need to write to the prison and tell them to inform you when they're going to give him furlough. Like she had no middleman. She had to do all of this on her own. God. So they denied him the first year, but then the second year of his term, he got the furlough, and no one called to tell her. She was not informed. He took his mother's car, went to his friend's house, got a shotgun. He drove straight to Mishawaka. It all happened very fast. He left at his friend's house at like 2. He got to her at like 3 in the afternoon. He broke in the house. She was in the shower. She ran naked out the door through the front yard, and he killed her by smashing the shotgun into her face. And her daughters watched that happen. The neighbors watched that happen. And pretty horrific.
Jesus.
Yeah.
And so it was the same kind of thing where it was like, the both being attacked out in public, like at their homes, and also with like failings of like law enforcement to do also anything to protect them. Yeah.
Right. And, Alan Matheny also had stolen his daughters. He kidnapped his daughters when they were first going through the divorce. He stole his daughters and threatened to kill her. And the only way that she got her kids back was she promised not to press charges against him. So he did everything that the guy in Tracey Thurman's story did, assaulting her when she's pregnant, becoming more and more violent, using the children, kidnapping them and like freaking out during a divorce and then trying to kill them. So yeah, very similar.
Yeah, it seems like this is a pattern. I guess with this with this movie, what things specifically about this movie have made it stick with you over time, you know, like about the just like images or scenes. um you'd said the opening scene, Katie, that one really, that, I mean, of course, yeah, that one really sticks with you. I thought that the sort of expanded version of that scene too that happens later, where you're just amazed at the sort of like havoc that Buck is causing, and you know, running around and stomping on her, and it's so upsetting. And then you're like, why aren't the police doing anything? This is horrible. But were there any particular scenes or moments that really stuck out to you besides that big climax?
No, I mean, I, for being like a little kid and seeing this movie, I would definitely say I'm the image of him, you know, stabbing her stayed with me the
Yeah.
longest. And then when I was rewatching it, I was like, I caught myself because normally, you know, sometimes when I watch movies now, I'll kind of veer off, you know, maybe scroll
Mm-hmm.
on my phone or whatever. But
Yeah.
during that scene, the 15 minutes of Dale Midkiff like flipping out and screaming, I didn't move. I didn't move.
Yeah.
And it was intense. And I'm thinking, I don't know the last time I watched a movie and didn't move. They and the acting, and I was, you know, just thinking from an acting point of view and a direction point of view, even when I make films, that kind of depiction is really hard to do. Like, it's really hard to think about, how are we going to do this? How are we going to get everyone together to understand, you know, to that level of intensity? And it was a very intense scene, and I'm glad that they did it that way, that they did a straight wide, and they just showed like the cop not knowing what to do, and neighbors watching and screaming, saying, get him, stop. And he's holding his child while he's doing this. The baby is screaming, and just so that they could see the complete like the cops completely abandoned Tracey. They completely abandoned her, let this, you know, rabid dog on her.
Rabid dog.
He should have been shot, you know, because he was saying, I killed your mother, I killed her, I hope she dies. You know, this is why I don't understand why he got an assault charge, because he was saying, I killed her, I killed your mother, I killed her, she's dead, I killed her, I killed her. He kept saying that.
That's attempted murder right there. If you're trying to kill somebody, that's attempted murder.
Cut her throat and her face.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't assault.
Yeah.
No.
But no, I agree that that they really managed to get this like this level of intensity, but also there's a feeling of realism to the movie. And it doesn't, you know, I had looking for like our monologue in here, which we always do. There's not really like a typical TV movie moralizing monologue in here. It does feel the dialogue, the scenes, the way that things play out, it feels very real and authentic. It's really well written and kind of gritty and realistic in the way
which
that
is
it
why
portrays.
I'm shocked that none of the actors, especially, you know, Dale and Nancy, they didn't get any nominations for the performances.
No, it's true. And I mean, yeah, you know, both of them, and in having just seen Dale Midkiff in the Elvis TV movie, this was, you know, kind of a similar thing of like initially being charming and then turning abusive, but he makes this character so specific in a way that's so different from his Elvis performance. I was really impressed with him in this. Um, uh,
The
so
eyes, when his eye acting and his eye movements in this is what sold his performance. Because when he was like, she's been up there for a long time, like his eyes would get crazy and stuff. He would do crazy eyes, and I've seen that look in the Misha honkies,
For real.
the Misha honkies of Mishawaka. I've seen that, like like the dudes. Because when I was growing up, Mishawaka was nasty. It wasn't what it is now. It's kind of bougie. It's getting a little fancy. But when I was growing up, it was where girls were like, it had the highest teen pregnancy rate. The men here did. I mean, a lot of my friends who went to Mishawaka, they did get beat up by their boyfriends. Yeah. Their boyfriends hit me. Their boyfriends would call me the B word and like slap me, hit me. So and the crazy eyes is the thing. It's a threat. It's like I'm gonna come for you. And that so he had that. He definitely reminded me of the local honky. Hope I'm not offending everybody, but you know what? These are my streets.
Misha honky is like, it's a Mishawaka nominator, so it's.
Let me say it. Let me speak my truth. I lived it.
So Autumn, I know you've done some research on the Tracey Thurman's real life. How closely do you think the film followed the facts of the case?
I think it did a really good job of following the facts of the case. I think that her character should have been a little sassier. Because according to people who knew the actual Tracey Thurman, she stood up for herself. And, Nancy did an excellent job portraying her, but she was very passive. And until you said there were those moments when she broke and she was like screaming but even in court, she was very passive. Of course, you can be passive in court, but you get me. Like, I thought she could be a little saucier, but I understand, the dynamics of it on screen. But it seemed like it was pretty on point.
And then what happened to Tracey after the events of the movie?
Well, they had gone to court and she sued the police and the city. And they dismissed the case against the city because they said that the city did not discriminate against her, but she did get a settlement against the police. And she actually had to settle for a lesser amount because they were going to appeal it. But she basically did win the case that said, these officers who were supposed to protect me as police officers, they failed in their job to protect me. And she believed that happened because being a woman, being married to him, and because of her treatment, the way that they didn't get to her right away, they put her off. They wouldn't really, they didn't really know in the show, if you remember in the movie, when they asked who was in charge of her case, remember, yes, in court, and they shifted it all around because nobody really knew, just I gave it to him and he gave it to him. And well, you kind of looked into it, but we really don't know who was in charge of it because they really didn't care,
Yeah.
That was very realistic. But she could have been a little sassier, but
and then I was doing a little bit of looking into things, and it seems like she really became kind of an advocate and making speeches and getting very involved, but kind of stopped being quite so public around when Buck got released. Because she was afraid that he was going to, to come after her. And I guess he didn't. But Katie, you were telling me some stuff about Buck after he got let out.
So he didn't go after Tracey because he got a new girlfriend who he had a child with. he did not marry her, but he had a girlfriend, and he laid hands on her, and she got a restraining order put on him.
Mm-hmm.
And then he remarried and moved to a small town in Massachusetts, where in 2008, a newspaper reported that the local neighbor was, was this Buck Thurman. And everyone was like, he did all that? He's such a nice guy. And then his quote is, I'm really sick of this following me around.
Yeah, no, it's clearly
she's paralyzed,
not
right? Like,
Yeah.
And the way that she's paralyzed was particularly where it's like there's the one side can move, but she has no feeling in it, and the other side can't move, but she does have feeling in it. So it's like this horrible mismatch. I can't even imagine how to relearn how to do normal things, with that. So it's incredible that he got out after 8 years, with got 14 years, and then right after he got out, he did it again to somebody. Once again, the system failing. They with movie narratives, they like to sort of be like, well, and then this new law got implemented and things got better. But things got better in some ways, but not necessarily in every way.
Well, yeah, because they also that law became what out of the Tracey Thurman law, was also the mandatory arrest law. So when a police officer gets a call for domestic violence, they have to make an arrest.
Mm-hmm.
They have to make an arrest. And so what has happened with that, the good and the bad, is that when they have to arrest the person who's being accused, but a lot of people who have been accused also said she did it. The victim did it. So then the victim gets arrested. So that is the problem with that. And also, the law, a lot in the 90s, a lot more men started coming forward about being abused at home by women, because that is something that happens, and they have more shame because of their gender, and because obviously it's like an eating disorder. It's considered a woman's issue. And when men were reporting domestic violence, a lot of the women who were beating their husbands were saying, no, he hit me. And even though they were the instigator of that violence, the male who was the victim was being arrested. So good and bad. I do think that I'll tell you, because the law didn't really go into effect, I think, until 1994.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1991, there was like a domestic violence at my house, and the cops didn't arrest the person. They put him in a hotel overnight, and then that guy walked to our house and showed up and was back.
Jesus.
So, and then I called the cops, and they took him. Then they arrested him. But it took a lot. It took a lot. They're just like, well, and then to make it more personal, in Mishawaka police, and 2003, when there was the domestic violence between me and one of my uncles who beat me up, the cops, my uncles were friends with the Mishawaka police. He was friends with them. They'd come to his work all the time. And where the incident took place was right in front of my uncle's work, but it was my grandfather's house. It's very confusing. So my grandfather's house was in front of my uncle's office. And the Mishawaka police laughed at me when they pulled up, and there was blood all over my legs, and I had bruises on my arms. They let him go. He drove off. They let him go. And one of the police officers begrudgingly took photos of me. And then that court case took 5 years to be processed.
Yeah.
So, and then, the judge found him guilty, but was it, come on, they didn't arrest him. He never was arrested. He never had, he got a charge on his record, but I mean, he's been abusing women since, he beat his ex-wife who fled in the night. Cause she messaged me and was like, that's, all of his wives and girlfriends he beat. It was common knowledge, and I was the first one to press charges. But it was a pain, because a lot of the women in my family were like, "Well, it happened, but," and I'm like, "No, no," and I did not at the time pursue the police, because I know it's a lost situation. Mishawaka police.
Yeah.
I had better luck with the county.
Yeah. I'm like,
I had better luck with county police.
That's who took photos.
Care.
The county police took photos. The Mishawaka police laughed, and the Mishawaka police have laughed at me before. Recently, they're better. I'll say recently.
Yeah, but, the Mishawaka police were a little corrupt back in the 90s.
A little.
I've heard some of the stories. So just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Recently they've been better. I've been shocked.
Mishawaka seems to be on the up.
It's
things
shocking.
Are improving.
I'm serious. I'm like, there's a social cantina in Mishawaka.
Yeah.
That's
maybe
a highfalutin, bougie Bloomington restaurateur.
Yeah.
There's all these it's very, I'm thankful, because
So maybe the cops are getting some training or something like that, or
I think training. Well, I think they're getting rid of the Confederacy. The local Confederacy is being broken up.
Yeah,
I think that's what's happening.
I think in the 90s, you guys, a lot of the reform with both police and law across the nation, it happened in the 90s when we introduced the Violence Against Women Act.
Yeah.
And it actually looked up some stuff about policing, during the times of before violence against women became a thing that we paid attention to. And they have changed a lot of the ways that they train their cops on how to react to a domestic violence situation. Domestic violence situations are actually more dangerous than other situations that cops have to deal with too, because we could see that in the character of Bud, and in the monster of Alan Matheny, is they're out of control. They want to consume the woman. They just want to beat her to a pulp and just pound their chest over. That rage is dangerous for police too. So I'm not giving them any leeway, but I'm just saying it is domestic violence.
Well, it goes back to the Tracey Thurman, the movie. That's what I think is so riveting about this movie, is they show the cop terrified and confused. This is nothing he's dealt with before.
Yeah.
This is not this man is out of control and on the loose, and he looks lost. He looked he literally looked like he was Don Knotts from what is that? What is that?
Mayberry.
From the Andy Griffith Show.
And he's what is happening? He was trying to be a small town little cop.
He was getting ready for retirement.
Yeah,
the cop that was called to it. Yeah.
Yeah, he was like, oh, whatever. I'm gonna phone it in. Oh, look at Lola, the cat. Sorry, it's cute. And he looked lost. He looked completely, he didn't know what to do,
Yeah.
They need great.
Yeah. And one of the things.
That's a good story. We should tell it. So she has a really good domestic violence story that I really like. I know it's bad, but this, I have to understand we're we're out here in the real deal, the real red states.
Red.
Yeah.
So, but this is a good story. I like her granny. Her granny can curse. Yeah. No, when I say curse, her granny can put a evil eye on somebody. So,
okay.
I don't mean curse. I mean like her
Yeah.
grandmother has the ability to cast a spell.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
She's not even practicing.
And that's what's odd. It's like sometimes you're just so powerful that it just comes out whether you're aware or not. But my granny is a lunar eclipse child. So she was born on a lunar eclipse, and she has the planet Uranus in conjunction to her sun. So she likes to shock people, but she's also like a live wire. And back in the day, my mom dealt with domestic violence daily, but there's sometimes it was worse than others. And this situation that occurred, her abuser, he was my stepdad. He came, he beat her up, punched her in the face, blood. He stole her car, he stole her money. He went to party and stuff. And so my grandma and my grandpa always came and like rescued my mom. And so they came and rescued her. And also she had 6 kids, dudes. Like she was 26, she had 6 kids. So that's another form of abuse, like constantly being pregnant and having children. Yep. And then they're financially abusing you because he comes and takes your money. My mom, it was, she was abused on many levels. But anyway, so my grandparents would come and save her. And so we went back to my granny's house. My grandma, she does not care. She's going to speak her mind. Taurus sun. Yeah. And like so she told my mom, she was so angry. My grandma was shaking. I remember her shaking as she was cussing and screaming. My grandpa was very passive and caring, and he was trying to help my mom. And my grandma she put her arm up. She did a freaking Scarlett O'Hara, and she was like, as God is my witness, if that MFer doesn't die tonight, I'm going to kill him. And he died that night.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So, don't mess with Granny.
I know. I was like, can Granny cast some spells for me?
She can, but power.
Yeah. God, I mean, that's, just sometimes you get so enraged with injustice and everything. I mean, if only that could happen more frequently. But
well, it's that energy
that's
that emanate from your heart and your mind. A woman's rage is dangerous. It can be.
Too bad it's used on petty arguments.
Right.
Yes. Channel that in the proper directions.
Yeah, instead of at your local like cashier.
Yes.
Okay. Don't bring it to Target to yell at them for not having your brand of sorbet. Okay, ladies, use it.
No.
Priorities, man.
So one thing I thought would be interesting is to talk about how this movie compared to other representations of domestic abuse you've seen in film. Because one thing that I was thinking about was how I've seen there are a lot more TV movies about domestic abuse than theatrical movies. But when I have seen abuse portrayed in theatrical movies, it's either, sometimes it's just a plot device or, but a lot of times the narrative is about a woman who is being abused, who has to like find her inner strength and confront her abuser. And you know what I mean? This is often how it goes. It's the
sleeping with the enemy.
Enough sleeping with the enemy. What's love got to do with it? Where there's like a climactic confrontation, and they shoot them or beat them or confront them in some way. And it's very cathartic and great and everything to see them, to see this guy get his. But it feels to me like that's a very kind of like man's take on what the solution to domestic violence is. Like, you just gotta kick his ass, You just
gotta go in there and tell him you don't mean no business.
Yeah.
And but they don't understand that you're also battling the institution of the courts, of the law, of the police, like you are also up against all that. As we've seen in the Tracey Thurman story, she wasn't just having to deal with Buck. She was dealing with the culture. She was dealing with her sister, who was basically Nancy Reagan personified.
Yeah.
and
It
who
seemed like
was
there
like,
was some
how did you
stuff
get your
going way back there, like
yeah,
old
how did you get
resentments.
yourself knocked up, and we're not going to help you. Tough luck. You got yourself pregnant. We're pro-life, but you're on your own. And then the same thing, then she calls multiple times. I mean, the thing is, it was so egregious about this is that it was happening in public. Like when he punched out her car windshield, it was at a traffic stop.
Yeah.
In a city, in front of people. It wasn't like on a rural block on a Saturday night in the dark or at a kegger. No, it was on broad daylight in a city that he did this. So it wasn't that is a man's take on it. The Jennifer Lopez enough, she learns martial arts and beats him up, or same thing with Sleeping with the Enemy, where she learns how to swim and has to fake her death.
And then shoots him in the end.
Yeah, and she shoots him in the end, which is a really good movie. I will tell you.
Yeah, no, it's a good, but I was thinking
it's a fantasy. It's a fantasy. It is a fantasy. Like theatrical films that deal with domestic violence are fantasies, because we all know Julia Roberts in Sleeping with the Enemy, where she shoots the intruder. That those small town police would be like, but he was your husband. Oh, you faked your death? Yeah. Well, now you're going to go to prison.
For fraud.
For
20 years.
For 20 years.
Yeah.
And he's your husband. Because this was, that movie was what, 1989 too? It was
like 1991, something like that.
Yeah. The 90s is when it started to like roll with change.
Yeah.
And,
and this movie was written by a woman, and so I felt, thinking about TV movie takes on abuse, and especially this one, I feel like it's more of they're not worrying about the male audience. They're making this specifically for women, and I think in the way that the abuse was just so bad and so hard to get out of, and she didn't escape fine from it. And also, I think a lot of women can just relate to those scenes of the police just being so unbothered and kind of sarcastic and dismissive, and that felt very real to me, where I was like, oh my God, this happens multiple times a day to every single woman like alive. But you don't really see it portrayed that much, just men being completely dismissive of a serious situation because of just like misogyny, just free floating misogyny.
Yeah, it's a culture. So basically, the culture is what.
It's the possession of women as we are possessions.
Yeah.
So like they own us, so therefore they're the ones that decide what they do with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks to religion. Yay.
I think they already wanted that. They just used a story, a good old story. And, I'm sure 2,000 years from now, they're going to find a way to do that with Star Wars. When Star Wars takes over Christianity in 2,000 years from now, they'll be like, and Princess Leia, they'll take the chain. They're like, and women all must be chained to a very large figure.
Yeah.
They'll be like, as our creator has so
George Lucas has said,
whatever.
I know.
We know they talk. They're like, henceforth, yeah.
But yeah, no, it comes down to misogyny and this idea, because the police kept being like, well, he's your husband. You're not going to let your husband see his kid. They related to him. They sympathized with him. And so she became the bitch ex-wife, in their eyes. And that was the thing. So then it feels almost like she's not just struggling against this one man, but she's struggling just against like men in general. And
but we are out here in Indiana. We are.
No, I'm not saying that you aren't. I'm just saying
I'm just saying that so the world at large acknowledges this, because this is the issue with feminism right now. And feminism has literally abandoned women, working women, or abused women. It has become an elitist institution where before feminism in the 70s and the 80s had a rescue element. It was about these matters. It was about domestic violence. It was about providing shelters, providing childcare. It had all these elements of changing the culture to understand what women face. But now it has become an elitist institution that almost looks down on you just as the sister who was like, well, you got yourself knocked up. Right. Whereas I feel like a lot of feminists nowadays, like my peers, would say, well, why don't you just, why didn't you just get an abortion? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? Well, it's your fault. They almost have taken on the tone of conservatives with how elitist they've become, because they have abandoned women. They have abandoned women who are being abused. They don't want anything to do with it. They're more concerned with elitist issues, things that are almost they're not life or death situations. They're paperwork situations. It's paperwork. It's a luxury issue. It's almost like it's like going through and writing little tickets versus, okay, there is actual women. Like as an Uber driver, I pick up a lot of women and take them to rescues. I take them, they'll call me and they're telling me I just left this. I'll pick them up on some random street and they're telling me the situation. Jesus. I'm the first person they talk to, and I drop them off at their location and I'm talking them down. Same thing with a lot of the women when they run out at the local women's shelter, when they run out of beds, they'll put them up at certain locations I'm not disclosing. And I'll take them and their kids to these locations. And I'm around it all the time. I'm in the culture. Like I'm called, I am called all types of names. And the thing is this isn't just men doing it. It's women too. Women, the women who are, have ingested this culture and are glad, these kind of like, well, I'm not like you got to pick your man right. Or the Jordan Peterson, like, men are supposed to protect women. And I'll point this out to a lot of my friends. I'm like, when has a man protected you from something? when you tell me.
True that.
Because I don't know when a man has protected me. The last time the last interaction I had with a man, he gave me an STD. He didn't protect me. Okay. We are the ones the women are always, Tracey had to go around and talk about, I was abused. Buck didn't have to do anything. Yeah. Who did he talk to? He gets to sit there with his wife in Massachusetts. I'm a changed man, which is a bunch of hoo-ha. He married, there's always a desperate woman out there, a pick-Misha. There's always a pick-Misha out there who's like, he's a changed man. Like, no, he's a dormant. It's dormant. It's laying there. There.
He also got to have another child.
He had two more.
She couldn't have any more children because of what had happened to her. So that, women suffer in more ways than you think. Also, like, just the whole, women are the ones usually to have to also take care of the children after traumatic situations like this. So on top of being traumatized and your children being traumatized, you also have to figure out money and you don't have anyone to support you. Like, thank God for families that do support women, but the story is more often than not a woman on your own. You better hustle, you bet. And then the children of these women who go through abuse, they witness this abuse and they're at a higher risk for becoming abusers themselves and also becoming drug addicts and people who can't deal with the trauma that they have to live with, which is,
and that's sort of what happened with CJ, that, he was arrested for, multiple things, but I believe that it was, drug charges. And then another time, he actually went to jail for a while for assaulting his girlfriend. And, I'm sure that him witnessing all of this stuff and growing up around it had something to do with that, and it's so hard because I'm sure that Tracey was doing, and apparently Tracey was, incredibly supportive of him, and but and trying to protect him from that as much as she could, but there's only so much she could do by herself. But although we have to give a shout out to Joan, her friend who
her friend completely helped her, and even the husband, he was like, you need to go, and he even was yelling at the cops like, arrest this man, what are you doing, this is ridiculous. But that's the whole thing, is like, that's the other element to it, is her friend was in danger too, because she had her child and she was holding her baby, trying to delay and calm him down, but he could have easily hit her, which would happen to me all the time growing up with as a teen in South Bend and Mishawaka, with my different friends who dated insane men. Like, all my friends growing up had erratic boyfriends that were ready to pop off. That it was like living in a exploitation 70s film. When I was growing up, it was like it's true. And your crazy boyfriend will hurt your friends. They don't care. They hate. You're just in their way. And I would be punched in the face and have my best friend say, well, you made him mad. And I'm like,
oh God,
it's you're my friend and you're bringing him over. And they will always, they almost seem to like it when he's hitting you and you're, hitting you instead of them.
Yeah.
But he's still hitting them.
My girlfriend didn't act that way. And I know that everyone is different, but I actually was beat up by one of my best friend's boyfriends. He was her baby's daddy. And he, gave all the excuses for why he did it. He had back surgery.
She opened her mouth
or whatever.